Namaskaram, which is how I say in my Southern Indian style. Good morning, and I thank the organizers for inviting and letting me talk about this topic. So just a question, how many of you have heard about the Moplah atrocity? Wonderful. I think that mostly all the Indians have heard. But it's one of those that have not been heard much. Even my own community from the southern part of India, I come from, the Indian subcontinent is shaped like an ice cream cone. I'm from the very bottom tip, and this is an incident that happened. But this was not an isolated incident. Moplah atrocity continues a pattern of abuse of the indigenous people. We are indigenous Hindus, and for about 1200 years, we have faced a series of atrocities at our community, and this was a pretty serious one. So the Mappila atrocity is over 100 years old. But just like what we heard about the Armenian genocide, if you don't talk about it, educate people about it, then you forget. And then history repeats itself. And the thing about remembering and memories is that our identities are rooted in those. We have history and lineage, especially for our people, that goes back maybe 5,000, 6,000 years. And part of it is also understanding who we were at one time and what happened to us and what were our contributions, etc. So let me go forward. Okay, so I also want to pay homage to the souls of all of those who died and suffered in the 1921 carnage, and to all who have been victims of the worldwide atrocities, which is what we are memorializing today. So with that, who were the, excuse me. So what happened in 1921 and what is the background of it? If you remember, India became independent in 1947. So this was a time when we were still a colonized nation under the British colonization. And we heard from the Armenian speaker that around the First World War time, the Ottoman Empire came to an end, right? And the Ottoman Empire for the Muslim world was the center of the spiritual authority. The Caliph was the leader of the Islamic religion. And so when that ended, it caused a lot of trauma amongst the Muslims worldwide. And as you know, India also has a big Muslim population at that time of about 330 million people in India. About 10% were Muslims, and they took this very seriously. They felt like the Ottoman Empire's defeat by the British had to be countered, that the caliphate had to be re-established. So the Indian independence movement was going on, and you all know about Mahatma Gandhi. He's called as the father of the nation. He felt like the Hindus coming together with the Muslims on the caliphate or the Khilafat movement, which was how it was called in India, would build a solidarity and a unified force to take out the British. So he had good intentions, but he did not quite understand how it would play out across the nation. So what happened was, the southern state of Kerala always had a large population of Muslims. So there, a few unrelated incidents then exploded into an outrage where the predominant victims were the Hindus. And it was a complete genocide of a population of an area called Malabar. And you might be familiar of this area called Malabar because very famous for spices. It was the end destination for the spice route from Europe. So why do we call it Mappila? What does that word mean? So the Kerala coast has been known as a great trading center for the Greeks and the Romans, even before the Europeans. And that is where 2,000 years ago the first Christians landed, the first Jews landed, and then they were welcomed. The Hindus welcomed them and said, you have sanctuary amongst us, live and practice your faith. faith. One thing you should know is that we are not a proselytizing religion, so we never imposed a religion on any of these people. Never converted them, never enslaved them, never slaughtered them, we welcomed them. So at that time, the spice trade was dominated by the Arabs, who plied the Arabian Sea. And they were the middlemen between Europe and India. So the spice trade brought lots of wealth to the state of Kerala, and the chieftains or the kings decided we have to really treat them with respect and honor these people who bring prosperity to us. So they call them Mappila. It has different meanings, but Mappila also means sons-in-law, because the local community said you can marry a Hindu woman and establish yourself in settlements and you'll be honored members of our society. So that one group of Muslims in southern India, particularly in the Kerala state, were called Mappila. So in 1921, when the Khilafat movement became a big unified movement to take out the British, there were certain people in Kerala, particularly two players. The first one's name was Ali Musaliar. He was an Imam, and he had been constantly calling out for jihad. And the other one, his name was Wariyam Kunyahamad Haji. And he had been such a troublemaker, he had been exiled to Mecca by the British. And then when he came back, he had to promise he would stay out of trouble. But the Khilafat movement gave both of them a chance to really stoke the resentments amongst the Muslim community against the Ottoman defeat, and to then take it out on the Hindu community. And it really resulted in, the numbers go, it says 2,500 to 10,000. We also hear 20,000, so regardless of people killed. 100,000 displaced. And remember, at that time, India was not 1.4 billion. The whole country was 300 million, so the Kerala population was really small. So this 100,000 people from the northern part of the state called Malabar, it was a significant impact on the community there. And the most atrocious thing was the forced conversions, right? The perpetrators came prepared. They came prepared to kill or convert, and which is what ended up happening. Unfortunately, right after that, decline of the Hindus started in that particular area. And of course, the subsequent government actions also accelerated the depletion of Hindus, and that particular area in Malabar was constructed into a district which is predominantly Muslim today. It's called Malappuram. It is also the hub of a lot of modern day jihadi centers, right? So what started then has continued to today in really bad ways. And then I just want to say how whitewashing happens, right? This happened right before the independence struggle. The Indian political parties, particularly the Indian National Congress, which was the majority party that took on the fight against the British, they decided, let's downplay this incident because we want to maintain communal harmony. And so not a single book was published on this until 97 years later in 2020, right? Nobody was allowed to make a movie about this except showing the perpetrators in a good light as heroes. So they keep talking about the reasons for what happened as India's freedom struggle against the British, but only the Muslim jihadis were part of the rebellion. No Hindus joined in. There were about 200 families, Christian families in the area, who were also completely destroyed and killed and displaced. So just the Muslim rebels alone, they tried to claim that they were fighting the British. And the perpetrators, the real ringleaders were killed, but a lot of them were called as heroes, and they were given government pension. To recent times, it's only in the last 2 years, a list of 387 members who participated in this killing were called out and asked to be delisted from the freedom fighters list. But the government of India goes very carefully about it. They have the recommendation, they have not acted on it, right? And the second reason given was that this was a peasant revolt. Well, the first victims of this jihadi attacks were the farm hands or the peasants, the Hindus. And no Hindu joined the movement. So it is definitely not a peasant revolt. It was just to, like you said, Adityanji, shove it under the carpet and forget it. Bygones are bygones, right? But since the centenary of this particular atrocity in 2021, there's a lot of interest in the people of the land to know what happened. It's not just the people of Kerala. All over India, they want to know what happened to the people, what was this incident, and now, finally, a movie has come out, produced by someone who was a Muslim, and that movie was dragged out without permissions for the longest time. It aired for the first time in March of this year. So sometimes it takes a long time, you know, for some justice to happen, right? So we heard about how terrible atrocities were committed on the Kurds, the Armenians, the Rwandans, and it's the same thing worldwide. Women become the first victims of all of this attacks, right? So in this particular case, again, rapes and assaults of the Hindu women and flaying, the men were flayed alive, the burning of entire homesteads and families, and forcible conversions of thousands of Hindus of all classes, from the landlords all the way down to the peasants, were forced to convert to Islam. And there are wells in that part of the country today that the Muslims would not allow anybody to go and do an excavation of, because they are filled with dead bodies and skulls now, disintegrated over such a long time. But nobody is allowed to go touch it, because you cannot talk about this. Not a single memorial exists for the victims, but several memorials exist for the perpetrators. Many of our temples were burnt, destroyed, desecrated. They still remain as ruins because the Hindus are not allowed to rebuild them. So the atrocity still continues. So I sourced a lot of this information from the British government records, newspapers, and letters to officials written over the century. I'm showing you just a couple of pictures. So the woman on the left is a Hindu woman of that time. They just wore 2 pieces of white cloth. And the Hindu men always had a hair tied into a bun. Removing the hair and the mustache was considered an insult, right? And so what happened with these perpetrators coming? You see, they came ready with the Islamic clothing for the women. They came ready with barbers who could shave the heads of the men. And I visited Auschwitz in Birkenau last year, and I saw the mound of hair of the Jewish victims, and it's unbelievable. But there were mounds of hair in Kerala that nobody talks about, but it really happened. And the well that I mentioned, there is a well still in ruins, and it says 1921 on it, but nobody can go and look into it. No Hindu can go, right? And the community is very solidly Muslim around it. The picture on the right left on the bottom shows the large numbers of folks who were displaced and made homeless in a land of their ancestors. They had been living there for thousands of years, and all of a sudden they were homeless. And just to give you an example of a criminal mind. So this, one of the jihadis was in the hospital for some injuries, and he knew he was not going to survive, and he said, well, I'm glad I killed 14 infidels, right? And the person who wrote this, C. Shankaran, in the Gandhi and Anarchy 1922, said men who consider it religious to murder, rape, loot, or to kill women and little children cutting down whole families, have to put down under some restraint in a civilized society. Unfortunately, this has not happened. After 100 years, last year, in the Malappuram region, there was a big rally by the Muslims, where a 10-year-old boy sitting on the shoulder of his father called out to the Hindus and said, "Get your funeral rites ready. We have the same weapons from 1921. We know where you live. If you don't toe the line to what we say, be prepared for another 1921. So we have learned a lesson from this, that people, little kids, they don't come out and say things unless they are trained to say that. And somehow I think one of the recommendations would be, how do we really stop the brainwashing of our young people? I don't care whether they are Christian, Hindu, Muslim or whatever, but they should be taught to be human, right? And have empathy and compassion for every living being. And so how do we know that this really happened? There were lots of leaders of the time. Annie Besant was a founder and president of the Theosophical Society, and she's regarded as a champion of human freedom. I'm not going to read the whole thing, but she said, they established the Khilafat Raj, crowned a king, murdered and plundered abundantly, killed or drove away all the Hindus who would not apostatize. Somewhere about a lakh means 100,000 people, were driven from their homes with nothing but the clothes they had on, stripped of everything. So when she talks about the Khilafat Raj, you may not remember or know, a Sharia kingdom was established in Malabar in 1921, and Ali Musliar, the leader of this whole Khilafat, the atrocity, anointed himself as the Raja of the Hindus and the Emir of the Muslims. And both Ali Musliar and Mariam Kunnat the Haji were captured and executed, along with a lot of others. But the fact that a Sharia kingdom was established in a land that was Hindu, right? I mean, it really sends shudders down our spines even to today, because since that time, there has not been a Sharia kingdom in India. Sharia is permitted for the Muslims to practice, just as Christians have canonical law in India, the Hindus have the Hindu law. They all have their freedom to practice their religion. But the Sharia law in a kingdom meant that any Hindu or any other non-Muslim would have to live like a Muslim. And that happened in Kerala. The next one is a very famous personality of the day, Dr. B.R. Ambedkar. Indian jurist, is known as the father of the Indian Constitution. He wrote a book called Pakistan, or the Partition of India. In that he said the blood-curdling atrocities committed by the Moplahs in Malabar against the Hindus were indescribable. And he actually called out Mahatma Gandhi and really, talked about how poorly Mahatma Gandhi thought about this, and how Mahatma Gandhi was culpable in the destruction of life of Hindus in India. So I would say partly, he was a great leader, Mahatma Gandhi. He got us, along with a lot of other leaders, freedom. But he also never apologized for this Moplah genocide. He said it's unfortunate, but never apologized for the result of his action of trying to bring Hindus and Muslims together. And unlike today, New York Times would report real news. Today they don't. But New York Times at that time had a story about the Moplahs as a menace for several years, and they had said the British government should have paid attention to this earlier and put a stop to what was going on, right? So that came out in 1921 September, the global news. So as I mentioned, since 1921, a lot of effort was put in to suppress the story, never to bring it up, not have any movies or thoughts or talks or books published about it. The Mappila writers were celebrated as freedom fighters, and no truth and reconciliation was done. So one of the recommendations I would make to the future is always have a truth and reconciliation effort. Because without that, there is no recognition of history, and there is no recognition, no opportunity for our people to grieve and to come to a closure. and I know Kofi G talked about the indigenous practice of coming together, overcoming the differences. Well, Truth and Reconciliation use indigenous practices to solve problems. So Western solutions don't work in indigenous cultures, I'm sorry to say, but we need to go back to our indigenous practices of reconciliation and coming to terms with how to live together. But you know, it's kind of hard in today's world. The world is kind of divided in very hard lines. And you know, like I said, in Kerala, many jihadi centers exist, but a lot of the Indian Muslims are proud Indians today. They speak out against these atrocities. They speak out against the narrative that Indian or Muslims are oppressed people, because they say, I'm a proud Indian and I want the world to know that. So I'm happy, you know, the Indians are standing up and saying this, and we need more of them to do that, so then the victims of such things can also meet with them happily and say, hey, we are brothers in action. And I think we talked about what it means to remember. I think Adityanji did a great job. So I'm just going to play a 1 minute video, audio from a letter.
To Her Gracious Excellency, the Countess of Reading, Delhi. The present Moplah Rebellion is unexampled in its magnitude, as well as unprecedented in its ferocity. It is possible that your ladyship is not fully appraised of all the horrors and atrocities perpetrated by the fiendish rebels, of the many wells and tanks filled up with the mutilated but often only half-dead bodies of our nearest and dearest ones who refused to abandon the faith of our fathers, of pregnant women cut to pieces and left on the roadsides and in the jungles, with the unborn babe protruding from the mangled corpse, of our places of worship desecrated and destroyed, and of the images of the deity shamefully insulted by putting the entrails of slaughtered cows where flower garlands used to lie, or else smashed to pieces. We beseech your compassionate ladyship to exercise all the benevolent influence that you possess with the government to see that our humble prayers are granted.
So this came from a letter written by the Rani of a small
kingdom.
To Her
Gracious Excellency, the Countess of Reading.
A letter written by the Rani of Nilambur on behalf of all of the victims of this atrocity to then Viceroy, meaning the leader, the British head of state in India, his wife, to take some action. Well, they did take some action and restored some of the homeland of people, but it really changed the nature of that particular district. Like I said, it's a predominantly Muslim. That was done, I have to say, by the state government, which was just consecutively the Indian National Congress or the Communist Party of India. I'm not sure if anybody knows that there is a Communist Party in India that still rules. So these are the resources I used, and everyone is welcome. That letter is online, and if you want to read, you can read it. But thank you for allowing me to talk about this particular genocide, and we should learn about this more and more. Thank you.